the weight she carried. A Hood Eloquence presentation. Where the streets meet the literature. The most dangerous woman in the room is the one who has already counted herself out, then quietly counted herself back in. Part 1. The Architecture of Silence. Chapter 1. Some women are built brick by brick, not born. The morning Kendra Marks-Dean turned 34, she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Buckhead penthouse and watched the city of Atlanta stir itself awake the way it always did, reluctantly, then all at once. She held her coffee in both hands. The mug was one she had bought herself 5 years ago at a farmer's market in Decatur, hand-thrown clay, deep brown glaze, the kind of imperfect thing that only grew more beautiful with use. Andre had tried to throw it away once. Said it looked like something you'd pull from a thrift store bin. She had placed it back in the cabinet without a word, and it had stayed there ever since. That was the language of her marriage. Staying. Holding its shape against the pressure. Saying nothing that could be used as ammunition later. She watched a woman on the street below flag a cab with both arms raised, something unburdened in the gesture, something free, and Kendra felt the familiar ache she had learned not to name. She pressed it down the way you press a bruise. Gently. Methodically. With the practiced hand of a woman who had done it so many times it no longer required thought. The apartment was quiet in the way expensive things are quiet. Not peaceful. Curated. Every surface earned its place through Andre's aesthetic and Kendra's money, though only one of them would tell you that. She heard him before she saw him. The particular weight of his footfall, the slide and click of his custom loafers against the marble she had selected. Andre Dean was a beautiful man. She had never stopped knowing that, even when she had stopped caring. He was broad-shouldered, mahogany dark, with a jaw that looked carved and eyes the color of wet earth. Women still watched him cross a room. That hadn't changed. What had changed was what Kendra felt when she watched them watch him. Nothing. Clean, exhausted nothing. You're up early, he said, moving to the kitchen with the easy authority of a man who had never in his life been uncertain about his welcome. Birthday, she said simply. He looked up from the refrigerator, brow creasing. A flicker of something. Recalibration. I know that, he said. We're doing dinner tonight. My mother made a reservation at Nikolai's. Kendra looked back at the window. Nikolai's. Of course. Diane Dean's territory. Diane Dean's choice. A dinner Kendra would pay for without being asked, because she always paid for the things that were never hers. I told her 6 o'clock, he added. She turned then and looked at her husband. Really looked, the way you look at a thing when you're finally done lying to yourself about what it is. Okay, she said. He poured his juice. He didn't ask what she wanted for her birthday. He didn't sing, or touch her shoulder, or say her name with any weight in it. He scrolled his phone. He sipped his juice. And Kendra Marks, daughter of Kendrick, keeper of her own counsel, the smartest woman in every room she had ever entered, looked at the mug in her hands and felt the first true crack form. Not breaking. Not yet. Just the hairline fracture that happens in good things when they've been held wrong for too long. Chapter 2. A mother-in-law's love is a conditional lease. Read the fine print. Diane Dean arrived at Nikolai's 20 minutes before her reservation like a woman who considered punctuality a form of aggression. She was dressed in champagne silk, her silver hair set in the kind of sculptured waves that required both talent and money, her handbag a cognac Hermes that Kendra had purchased for her 2 Christmases past. She had thanked Andre for it. That was Diane in a sentence. She kissed her son on both cheeks. She kissed the air near Kendra's face. She sat and unfolded her napkin with the theatrical precision of a woman who believed every movement was being observed and judged accordingly. Kendra, she said, the name shaped like a question she had already answered, you look tired. Thank you, Diane. Andre coughed into his menu. A warning. Kendra smiled and reached for her water. The evening moved the way it always moved. Diane ordered for the table without consulting anyone. Diane steered the conversation toward Dean Global Holdings, the family commercial real estate firm, or what remained of it, the way a surgeon steers a blade. Purposeful. Bloodless. Andre listened and nodded and subtly watched his wife's face for the reactions he needed to control. The Midtown portfolio, Diane was saying, touching her wine glass without lifting it, is an opportunity. We simply need the liquidity to move on it before Q1. Kendra said. The Riverside refinance could be restructured, Andre added. He was looking at her. Not at her face, at the space around her. The calculation disguised as conversation. Kendra set down her fork. She had not become the woman she was by being moved by pressure she could see. I'm not restructuring anything right now, she said pleasantly. Not tonight anyway. It's my birthday. Something crossed Diane's face. A recalibration. Then the smile widened, slow, patient, the smile of a woman playing a long game. Of course, she said. We can talk business after the baby comes. Silence pulled around the table. Kendra looked at Diane. Diane looked back, unhurried. Andre reached for his wine. The baby. Always the baby. The word that was not a word about love. I'm going to use the restroom. Kendra said, and stood, and left the table with her shoulders square and her face smooth, because she had mastered the art of departing rooms in a way that left nothing behind for anyone to collect and use. In the marble-floored quiet of the restaurant's powder room, she looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. Her face, her grandmother's cheekbones, her father's eyes, that particular shade of medium brown that her father called good earth color, because it held everything and gave nothing away. She thought of Kendrick Marks, 2 years dead, and heard his voice as clearly as if he'd been standing beside her. Baby girl. When a man tells you what he wants with your money more than what he wants with your heart, you need to hear that as the whole sentence. She looked at herself a moment longer. Then she touched up her lip gloss, straightened her shoulders, and went back to the table. Chapter 3. She built her own architecture in the dark. They never thought to look up. What most people understood about Kendra Marks-Dean could be filed under a single heading: Kendrick Marks' daughter. The cautious man's careful girl, moving through Atlanta's upper echelon on the momentum of inherited wealth and a certain effortless elegance that people mistook for old money's ease. They were wrong. Or rather, they were only half right. Yes, her father had been comfortable. Kendrick Marks had spent 40 years in commercial insurance, building a client list that read like a digest of Atlanta's black business community. He had been thoughtful with his money. He had sent his daughter to Spelman, then to Emory for her MBA, then watched with quiet pride as she turned internships into relationships into a career in equity research that was, by any measure, exceptional. What they did not know, what Kendra had learned from her father to keep private with the same conviction others keep secrets, was that her own portfolio had nothing to do with Kendrick's estate. She had started building it at 26, with $12,000 she had saved in 2 years of careful living and strategic overtime. She had studied. She had been patient the way compound interest requires patience. She had made calculated moves in real estate investment trusts before she turned 30, had diversified into private credit facilities after 31, had spent the pandemic years watching the market with cold, surgical attention while Andre panicked and Dean Global bled money and Kendra quietly bought distressed assets at prices that would have made her father weep with appreciation. By the time Kendrick died, Kendra Marks-Dean had a net worth that exceeded her inheritance by a factor of 3. She told no one. Not Andre. Not his mother. Not her attorney, though Rosalind Carter, the woman who had structured her holdings across 4 shell entities with names that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't sat in Kendra's home office at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday, suspected. "You're the most quietly dangerous client I have," Rosalind had said once, pouring coffee, not looking up from the documents spread between them. "Good," Kendra had said. The inheritance was real. Kendrick Marks had left his only daughter a lump sum estate supplement, a baby fund, structured in language that was embarrassingly, painfully specific about its intent, that would release upon proof of a viable pregnancy. $420,000, earmarked for the care of his first grandchild. It was the one thing he had structured emotionally rather than strategically, and Kendra had always found it both tender and inconvenient, the way anything truly human tends to be. She did not need the money. She had never needed the money. But someone else needed it very much. Part 2. 5 Things My Father Told Me. Chapter 4. The first thing. Watch what a man does with silence. It will tell you everything he hasn't said. The first lesson came on a Sunday afternoon, 2 years before Kendrick Marks died, when the cancer was still a rumor his body was keeping from him and the light in his kitchen was the particular amber gold of late Georgia October. Kendra had come alone. She came alone often, now, finding reasons to make the 40-minute drive to Cascade without mentioning it to Andre, who found her father's company uncomfortable in a way he could never have articulated and never had to. Andre Dean did not love any room that didn't center him. Kendrick was making fish. Tilapia, seasoned with the particular blend of his hands and his mother's ghost. He didn't look up when she came in, just said, "Get the lemons out the drawer," and she did, and they cooked together the way they had cooked together since she was 9 years old, moving around the kitchen in the choreography of old love. They ate. They talked about nothing that mattered: a neighbor's new dog, a Braves game, a book Kendrick had started and abandoned. And then her father, with the unhurried precision of a man who has decided something, set down his fork. "That man of yours," he said. Not unkindly. Just honestly, the way he said everything. Kendra felt the shift. "Daddy, I'm not starting anything. I just want to ask you something." He looked at her with those eyes that had never learned to lie. "When was the last time Andre Dean was proud of you? For something you did. Not for who you are to him. For something that was yours." She opened her mouth. She closed it. She thought about the Meridian deal, the leveraged buyout she had structured and managed that had netted her first 7-figure return. She had told Andre at dinner. He had nodded and asked if she had talked to his mother about the pool renovation. "Watch what a man does with your wins," Kendrick said quietly. "Not your losses. Men always show up for losses. Makes them feel useful. Watch what he does when you win. Does it make him bigger? Or smaller. He picked up his fork again. That's the whole story right there. She drove home in the dark with his voice sitting in the passenger seat. She did not tell Andre what her father had said. She filed it somewhere deep, in the place where she kept the things that were true but not yet actionable. Chapter 5. The remaining 4. A woman who has been well taught is a woman who is never truly alone. The second lesson came 3 months later, at Thanksgiving, when Diane had spent the better part of the meal redirecting every accomplishment of Kendra's into a narrative about the Dean family's resilience. Kendra had endured it with the still smile she wore at these events and afterward, washing dishes beside her father while the others settled in the living room with their after-dinner drowsiness. Kendrick had leaned close and said, "Lo. People who take credit for what isn't theirs do it because they have nothing of their own left to claim. Don't argue with them. Just remember it. The ledger is always accurate, even when nobody's reading it out loud." She had nodded. He had handed her another dish. The third lesson she had not known was a lesson until much later. It was January, and Kendrick had asked to see her financial documents, not her joint statements with Andre, but her personal accounts, the ones she had been building in quiet. She had sat across from him at his kitchen table, feeling strangely young, while he read with the careful eyes of a man who had spent decades reading the fine print that other people skipped. When he finished, he did not say anything for a long moment. Then, keep this completely separate. Whatever you feel about that man, keep this completely separate. Money that shares a name becomes money that can be argued over. Money with only your name is just yours. He had tapped the page. Make sure Rosalind knows. Make sure there are walls between everything. He had looked up. Promise me. I promise, she had said. She had called Rosalind that same week. The fourth lesson was the one that had made her cry in her car in his driveway, because by the time he delivered it, the cancer was no longer a rumor and they both knew it, though neither said so directly. He was thinner. His hands, which had always been her North Star in any room, were beginning to show their architecture more plainly. The hardest thing you will ever have to do, he said, looking at nothing in particular, at the light through his kitchen window, at the middle distance where old men look when they are speaking to the future, is leave something before it breaks you completely. Not because you couldn't survive the breaking. You're my daughter, you could survive anything. But because you deserve to leave whole. Whole is better than surviving. Remember that. Whole. She had nodded and held herself very still and did not cry until she was in the car with the windows up. The fifth lesson was delivered from a hospital bed, 11 days before he died, when the room smelled of antiseptic and quiet grief and her Aunt Cecilia had stepped out to get coffee. He had taken her hand, still warm, still steady, and looked at her with complete clarity. When you know it's time, he said, don't hesitate. Don't negotiate. Don't give them time to reorganize. You make your move and you don't look back. He squeezed her hand once firmly. I raised you to know the difference between a door and a wall. When you see the door, go through it. Fast. 11 days later, Kendra Marks died with the quiet dignity of a man who had conducted his entire life in service of what was right. He left his daughter his house, his car, his record collection, and $420,000 designated for the care of his unborn grandchild. He left her, more importantly, 5 things she would carry like a compass. Part 3. The Inheritance of Knowing. Chapter 6. Pressure is only powerful against something trying to hold its shape. The conversations about a baby had begun early in their marriage, gently at first, the way things begin gently before they don't. Andre wanted children. He had said so before the wedding, and Kendra had not disagreed. She had wanted children too, once, in the part of her life before the specific texture of her marriage had made her reconsider what she was willing to bring a child into. Now, 6 years in, the gentle conversation had become a different kind of pressure. Not violent. Not loud. Andre Dean had never needed to be loud. He had other tools. There was the silence after she declined his advances on certain evenings, a silence that occupied the bedroom with the weight of an accusation. There was the way he mentioned, with studied casualness, that the Wilkersons had announced their 3rd pregnancy at church last Sunday, and wasn't that something? There was Diane at every dinner, every holiday, every telephone call that always somehow found its way to Kendra. Diane, with her honey-smooth voice and her titanium-reinforced patience, asking after Kendra's health, her schedule, her stress levels, as though a baby were a medical condition that required only the right combination of rest and willingness. Kendra listened. Kendra watched. Kendra continued to hold the shape of her life with both hands. She had not yet given them the reason. She had not said that her gynecologist had confirmed, 18 months prior, that she was entirely capable of carrying a pregnancy. She had not said that she had considered it, genuinely, with the full weight of her heart, and found that the answer that came back was not yes. Not now. Not in this. What she did instead was what her father had taught her without ever using the word strategy. She watched. She tracked the company's quarterly losses with the same care she tracked her own assets. She noted the pattern of each new pressure, when it intensified, what preceded it, who was in whose ear, the way a scientist notes conditions in an experiment she did not choose to be part of. She saw the shape of it long before she could name it. It was the shape of desperation, wearing love's clothes. Chapter 7. A man unravels from the edges. You'll see it first in the small things. The evening she found the Dean Global Holdings Emergency Board report left open on the shared printer, the one in the home office she barely used, because she had her own office space across town that Andre had stopped asking about, was an evening in late February, when Atlanta was doing its irritating trick of being 40 degrees and sunny at once. She had not been looking for it. She had been printing a real estate appraisal document for Rosalind. The board report had come out behind it, still warm, and she had almost set it aside unread. Almost. The language was corporate and careful, and it told a story she had suspected in pieces, but never seen whole. Dean Global Holdings had a commercial debt load that had crossed the threshold of what any standard refinancing could address. Their Midtown portfolio was overleveraged. Their operating cash reserves were, by the numbers on page 4, effectively exhausted. The board was recommending an emergency capital injection of no less than $400,000 within 60 days to avoid covenant breach on their primary lender relationship. $400,000. Kendra stood at the printer for a long moment, holding the report, her mind doing what it always did, moving cleanly through implications, sequencing, cause and effect, with the cool efficiency of a woman who had been trained in equities and had never lost that habit of reading what numbers actually say versus what people wish they said. $420,000. Her father's baby fund clause. The number was not a coincidence. She knew it in the same part of her that had always known things before the evidence arrived to confirm them. She set the report back on the printer tray. She retrieved her own document. She closed the home office door with the same soft, measured click she used for every door in this apartment, and she went to her kitchen and stood at the window with her arms folded and her face very still. She thought about her father. About his fourth lesson. About what it meant to leave whole rather than survive. She did not panic. Panic was a luxury she had never been able to afford and had never wanted. She began to plan. Chapter 8. Desire is honest. It's intimacy that lies. Andre came to her that night the way he came to her in the months when the pressure was high, not with anger, but with his hands, which he had always known how to use. He was a physical man. He understood bodies the way he had never understood ledgers, with a natural ease that had been, in the early years of their marriage, something she had genuinely loved about him. She did not turn away. She was not ready to show her hand. He moved to her side of the bed and touched her face, and she let him, lying on her back in the dark with Atlanta's ambient glow pressing through the curtains and his breath warm at her temple. His hands were certain. They had always been certain, even when the rest of him was falling apart. He kissed her throat, and she closed her eyes, and somewhere in the space between memory and present tense, she thought about who she had been the first time she let him close, 27 years old, certain she was choosing something true. "I love you," he said, and she believed he meant it, in the way a man means the things that serve him. She touched his jaw. "I know," she said. He was gentle. He was always gentle when he needed something. He moved against her with the particular rhythm of a man who had learned her body well and used that knowledge with practiced care, and she allowed herself the narrow space of physical response. Her body had never needed her heart's permission, even as her mind stayed very quiet, very clear, the way water stays clear when it's deep enough. After, he lay beside her with his hand on her stomach, and she felt the weight of it differently than she ever had before. Not tender now. Transactional. It was an old gesture in a new light, and she looked at the ceiling and felt nothing break inside her, which meant something important, that there was nothing left to break in that particular place. "We should talk to a doctor," he said, not for the first time. "Together. Just to see where things are. My mother found someone on the north side. Fertility specialist." She said Andre. She said his name gently. "The way you say a word to close a door." He was quiet. "It's late," she said. His hand on her stomach didn't move for a moment. Then it did. She waited until his breathing changed. Until the particular depth of his sleep settled over the room like another kind of silence. Then she lay in the dark and went back to her plan. Part 4. What she heard through the wall. Chapter 9. The truth doesn't announce itself. It waits for you to be still enough to hear it. It was a Thursday in March, a week when Atlanta had finally decided to be spring, and Diane had come by the penthouse in the late afternoon, which she sometimes did, in the way of women who believe their sons' homes are extensions of their own domain. Kendra had been in the secondary bedroom that she used as her quiet room, not an office, just a chair and a window and her own thinking, when she heard the front door. She had not announced herself. She had simply sat, the way she sat, with one leg tucked beneath her and a glass of water going warm on the table beside her, listening to the sound of arrival. She heard Andre. She heard his mother. She heard the familiar settling of their conversation into the register it always used when they believed they were alone, looser, more direct, stripped of the performance each of them maintained for audiences. She was not trying to eavesdrop. The apartment's open floor plan and Italian tile made privacy an architectural fiction. She simply had not moved. The specialist confirmed it takes 6 weeks minimum before any results would show, Diane was saying. Her voice was low but clear, the voice of a woman consulting rather than conversing. Which means she would need to be pregnant by. I know the timeline, mother. Then act like it. We are running out of room here, Andre. The lender's patience is not indefinite and neither is mine. A silence. Ice in a glass. She's not going to just. She doesn't have to agree. That's not what I'm suggesting. Diane's voice had gone quieter. More careful. The way voices go when words are being chosen not for their meaning but for their deniability. There are supplements. There are things that encourage the body's readiness. She wouldn't need to know about the timing. She'd just find out she was pregnant, and then the clause triggers, and we move the funds into the renovation account before. What about after? A longer silence. Diane. After is a problem we address after, his mother said. There are arrangements that can be made. Estate complications happen. Postpartum is a difficult time. Grief does things to people. Kendra did not move. She sat with the glass of warm water in her hand and her father's voice in the chambers of her chest, not a memory, but a presence, as real as the air, and she understood, completely and without any soft edges, exactly what she had heard. Not the threat of losing her money. Not the threat of losing her marriage. Her life. Arranged for after. She sat with it for 4 seconds. Long enough to let it be real. Long enough to let it settle into the clarity she would need to move from. Then she set down the water glass without making a sound and began, in the orderly interior of her mind, to build the door her father had told her to go through. Chapter 10. The wisest call you'll ever make is the one you've already prepared to make. Rosalind Carter answered on the second ring, which meant she had been awake, which meant she was either in the middle of a deal or the middle of a crisis, and Rosalind Carter had always found those two states functionally indistinguishable. I need you, Kendra said. A beat. How bad? I need to completely disappear overnight. All of it. The accounts, the entities, the property. I need to be untouchable by morning. The silence on the other end was the silence of a brilliant attorney running through implications. Then, are you safe right now? Yes. Are you being followed, surveilled, coerced? Not yet. Then you've got time to do this right. Which is the only way we're doing it. Rosalind's voice shifted into the register Kendra had heard in closing arguments, in boardrooms, in the moments before everything changed. Come to my house. Not my office. My house. Bring nothing with his name on it. Give me 40 minutes. I'll make coffee. Kendra closed the call. She sat for one more moment in the quiet room, her chair, her window, the Atlanta dusk going deep blue and amber outside, and she thought about Kendrick Marks, the way he had held her hand in that hospital room. The way he had said whole. Then she stood and straightened her spine and moved. Part 5. The Overnight. Chapter 11. Disappearing is not an act of weakness. It is the most deliberate move on the board. Rosalind Carter's home was in Druid Hills, in a brick Tudor that sat behind an enormous oak tree as though the house had decided decades ago that it preferred privacy to being admired. The kitchen light was on when Kendra pulled into the drive, and the smell of good coffee reached her before she was fully inside. They sat at Rosalind's dining room table with legal pads and laptops and the kind of focused efficiency that bypasses pleasantries entirely. Rosalind was 52 and wore her gray hair natural and had small round glasses and the precise, unhurried hands of a woman who had never in her professional life made a careless mistake. Walk me through everything you have that is solely yours, Rosalind said, pen poised. Not joint, not shared, not community titled. Yours. Kendra walked her through it. The 4 holding entities. The REIT positions. The private credit fund allocation. The cash reserves. The property in Savannah held under a trust named for her grandmother. The brokerage account Rosalind herself had structured 3 years prior under a name that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't been in that room. Rosalind listened. Made notes. Asked 2 clarifying questions, both precise. Then she looked up. There is nothing here that touches Andre Dean, she said. I know. And nothing that touches Diane Dean, which means nothing that touches their company, their debt, their liability. I know. Rosalind leaned back slightly. Then what you need from me tonight is not financial architecture. You already have that. What you need is the legal filing, the address change, the service of process that they can't preempt, and the protection order. Yes. And you want to be gone before he wakes up tomorrow morning. I need to be. Rosalind looked at her for a long moment, that particular attorney's look that contains a question about what the client actually needs versus what they've asked for. Then she pulled a fresh legal pad to the center of the table and wrote, in her clean, deliberate hand, a list of steps. They worked until 2 in the morning. Rosalind drafted. Kendra authorized. The city outside the tutor's windows went dark and quiet and then, by degrees, began to suggest morning. Chapter 12. She had always packed light. She had always known that the most important things cannot be packed. She went back to the penthouse at 2:45 in the morning. Andre was asleep. She could hear his breathing from the hall. She moved through the apartment the way she had moved through it for 6 years, with complete assurance, without wasted motion. She went to the second bedroom. She had a bag there already, the kind that had been ready for a long time without her ever acknowledging why. Passport. Laptop. Hard drives. The specific portfolio of personal documents, her own, only hers, that Rosalind had told her to keep within reach years ago, when Kendra had signed her third and most comprehensive protection agreement. She did not take the Hermes bag Diane had thanked Andre for. She went to her own jewelry box, a wooden case her father had given her for her 16th birthday, unremarkable looking, invaluable, and took the pieces that were hers. The ones with her grandmother's history in them. The ones she had bought with her own money. She left the pieces Andre had given her in the precise positions he would find them. She went to the kitchen. She stood at the counter for a moment. She thought about taking the clay mug, hand-thrown, deep brown glaze, beautiful and imperfect and completely hers. She picked it up. She felt its weight. She wrapped it in a dish towel and placed it in her bag. She took one last walk through the apartment she had styled and paid for and held together with the invisible labor of her management and her money and 6 years of her best years. She looked at it clearly, really looked, no protective lens, no willful softening, and saw it for what it had always been. A beautiful cage. Hers only in the way that everything here was hers, completely, and therefore not at all. She touched the wall at the hallway's end. Just with 2 fingers. The way you say goodbye to something you are done grieving. Then she picked up her bag and walked to the front door and opened it and stepped into the hall and pulled it shut behind her. The click of the latch was the quietest sound she had ever made. It was the loudest decision of her life. Part 6. The Real Lookover. Chapter 13. The morning after a brave night is the most honest light you will ever stand in. She stayed that first night in the Savannah property, the one held in her grandmother's trust, the one with the wide plank floors and the courtyard and the scent of salt air pressing through every window. She had not been there in 2 years. She had maintained it as an asset, as a vehicle, as the quiet shelter she had prepared without admitting she was preparing. She arrived at 5 in the morning with her single bag and her clay mug and sat on the back steps in the dark while the city she had not expected to feel so much about slowly announced itself in birdsong and sea salt and the particular low light of a Georgia dawn. She did not cry. Not then. She had cried in her car in her father's driveway 2 years ago, and she understood that moment to have been the beginning of all of this, the grief and the reckoning and the slow accumulation of clarity. She had done her crying ahead of time. A woman like her always did. What she felt instead, sitting on those steps in the dark, was something she had not felt in so long that it took her a moment to name it. Room. She felt room. The particular interior spaciousness of a woman who no longer has to manage someone else's reality at the expense of her own. It filled her chest like the first full breath after a long illness. Her phone had 17 missed calls by 8 in the morning. Andre. Diane twice. A number she didn't recognize that she suspected was Diane again. She looked at them the way you look at weather through glass, observing without being touched, and set the phone face down on the kitchen counter. At 8:15, Rosalind called. "It's filed," she said. All of it. The divorce petition, the protection order application, the financial disclosure, the one that shows your portfolio in full, completely untouched, completely separate. His attorney will receive service today. And the baby fund? The estate has been notified. The clause remains intact. It's for your care, Kendra, for your child, not his, but the funds cannot be accessed by anyone other than you, and only under the terms your father specified. Nobody is getting into that trust except you. Certainly not a dying company's emergency capital account. Rosalind's voice carried the particular satisfaction of a woman who has closed a door before someone could put their foot in it. It's done. Kendra exhaled. Thank you. Thank your father. He wrote that clause like a man who knew something. He always did. Chapter 14. Accounting for a life is not the same as condemning one. It is simply the beginning of building the next. In the weeks that followed, Kendra gave herself what she had never before allowed, a full, unhurried, unflinching accounting. Not of what he had done. Not of what they had done. Of what she had carried, and for how long, and in service of what exactly. She had been the financial architecture of Dean Global Holdings twice, in moments she had told herself were investments in a shared future, a refinance restructure she had personally brokered, a cash infusion she had framed to herself as a loan. She had styled and maintained and managed every shared space they had ever occupied. She had attended his family's events and absorbed his mother's slights and sat at tables where her intelligence was received as a pleasant accessory rather than the central fact of her person, and she had done all of this without complaint, which she had once understood as strength and now understood as something more complicated. It was not weakness that had kept her. She released herself from that particular lie immediately. It was the complex arithmetic of a woman who had been taught to see clearly and had simply been, for a time, more invested in the version of the story where the clarity was wrong. She sat on the back porch of the Savannah house in the evenings, the way her father had sat on his back porch in Cascade, and she let herself be instructed by stillness. She cooked for herself. She called her college roommate, Tamara, who had been asking her to visit for 2 years and had never once said "I told you so," which was its own kind of love. She walked. She thought. She reviewed every decision she had made in the last 6 years with neither self-punishment nor self-deception, just the clear-eyed assessment of a woman taking stock of her own ledger. The ledger was, by any honest reading, extraordinary. She had built something real. She had protected it with foresight and discipline and the particular wisdom of a woman who had listened to her father. She had loved someone imperfectly, had been, perhaps, imperfect in return, and had found the door when it was time to find it. She was 34 years old. She had assets that would outlast anything she had lost. She had a father who had loved her well enough to prepare her for the thing he could not protect her from. She had herself. Whole. Exactly as he had wanted. Chapter 15. The question is never whether you survive. It is whether you arrive on the other side recognizable to yourself. 6 months after she left, on a Tuesday morning when the Savannah light was doing its gold and generous thing through the courtyard windows, Kendra Marks sat at her kitchen table with the clay mug and her laptop and a call scheduled with an architect about a mixed-use development she was acquiring in Charleston. She had not spoken to Andre Dean since the morning after she left, when he had called 7 times and she had answered once and said, with perfect calm, "You'll hear from Rosalind. Not from me. Take care of yourself, Andre." She had meant it. Not warmly. Not coldly. Cleanly, the way you close an account. Diane had written a letter. A remarkable document, layered with grievance and implication, and a particular kind of desperation dressed as maternal dignity. Kendra had read it once, given it to Rosalind, and released it from her mind like smoke from an open window. Dean Global Holdings had filed for Chapter 11 restructuring in May. She had read about it in the Atlanta Business Chronicle with the quiet, complicated feeling of a woman who had known something was coming and found no satisfaction in being right. She had not used her father's baby fund. Not yet. That money sat in its careful trust like a letter from a man who had believed in her future more than she had, at certain points, been able to believe in it herself. It would be there when she was ready, when a child was welcomed into a life that was actually hers, into a love that was not a transaction. She intended to be ready. She was working toward it deliberately, the way she worked toward everything. Tamara had visited in April and stayed 2 weeks, and they had eaten their way through Savannah's restaurants with the uncomplicated joy of women who have known each other long enough to be honest. On the last evening, walking back along the river with the lights golden on the water, Tamara had said, "You look like you again." Kendra had thought about that for a while. "I think I look like the version of me that was always there," she said finally. There was a lot of management in the way. Management of what? She had considered. Everything that wasn't mine. She took the morning call. The architect was good, thorough, and creative, with a clear-eyed sense of what the building wanted to be. They talked for 40 minutes, and she made 3 decisions and felt the particular pleasure of a mind working freely, without the background noise of someone else's need pressing at the edges. After the call, she sat for a moment with the mug in both hands. The sun was doing something exceptional through the window. The kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they were always meant to be beautiful. She thought of her father's kitchen. The amber October afternoon. The tilapia and the lemons and the way he looked at her before he said the first thing she would carry forever. "Watch what a man does with your wins." She smiled, small and private and entirely her own. "Okay, Daddy," she said to the light. "I'm watching." The end. Hood Eloquence. Where the streets meet the literature. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The weight she carried.